Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It's Friday afternoon. We've got a full house. It's Brian Degnan, Alan Morrison from Celtic by Numbers and the Huddle Breakdown, and also Lloyd Patrick Jepson. Listen, lads, massive weekend coming up. It's been a huge week, though. And we've done well on the B team level in the Glasgow Cup. We've done well last night. Let's start off with last night. Brian Degnan, we've spoken about the women's team now for a good 3 years under Fran Alonso. And it's sensational to see how great the growth has been in that side and in the women's game in general.
Yeah, it's excellent. And, you talk about growth and you look at the support that was there last night. I think that's a real indictment of how well the women's team are doing. And, thanks to platforms like Acsom that constantly promote it and a lot of your contributors that do a lot of work to promote it. I think it's that awareness is growing and growing. So well done. And yeah, as I say, we've spoke a lot about Fran Alonso and the work he's doing, and it really is quite incredible. I mean, the standard's really high. The players are playing well, getting the results that before maybe couldn't have achieved. But yeah, as I say, the most pleasing thing for me was seeing the amount of support. I think that's really, really good, and big thank you to everyone that promotes the game. I think
brilliant. I mean, we've had representatives of the Celtic end on the show talking about their plans for a wall very similar to the Borussia Dortmund great yellow wall. This would, of course, be a green and white one. And last night we got an insight into just what that might look like, Alan. It was sensational. I mean, that kind of footage should be doing the rounds. People should be looking at that all over European football saying this was Celtic's women's team at Celtic Park last night. Phenomenal atmosphere.
Absolutely tremendous, and well done to the ladies. The team's obviously improving over the last few years, and it's quite an exciting title race. I mean, it's incredible. It's going to go down to, looks like, the last game. So that hopefully is being promoted in the wider sense in Scotland, and it's great to see Acsom and others. The Cynic have got I think a dedicated Twitter feed for the women's team, for example, as well. So that type of fan engagement. What all that says to me, and what this week has shown, I think, to me, is that what are the club doing to really coordinate the various strands of Celtic, the different teams, the B team, the under-18s, the women's team. To me, it should be a single umbrella. It should be a single strategy of how do we maximize exposure and grow Celtic, because these are all great stories. These are all things that the fans are actually becoming more and more interested in. I mean, because of social media, because of the sheer volume of blogs and accounts and Twitter and so forth, there's plenty of space to discuss not just the first team, but actually, who's looking good in the under-18s, deeper insight into the lower league fixtures, more exposure for the women's fixtures. What are the club doing to sort of coordinate this? And also, just one other thought for last night. I mean, you talk about the sort of green wall, but I mean, would Celtic benefit from having? I've been to Manchester City's. I know this is one extreme to potentially to another, but I've been to Manchester City's, their football centre, which is incredible, and they have I think it's an 8,000 seater stadium where their youth teams play.
Mm-hmm.
Do Celtic, through having a B team, an under-18 team, a women's team that Celtic fans are passionately interested in, could they justify having, for example, a 10,000 seater stadium that if you put that crowd in last night, it would have been rammed. It would have been absolutely full, and it would have been noisy as hell. It's great that they get to play at Celtic Park, but what I'm really saying is, where is the coordination? Where is the thinking that sort of brings all this together and maximizes the exposure for all of those teams?
Yeah,
and helps to grow them.
Absolutely. I think there's been talk about Barrowfield, and interestingly enough, I was just looking earlier on today about the history of the women's game, and I'm not sure if anybody out there, and this is not a competition, if anyone out there could tell us who scored the first ever competitive goal for the women's team. It was in 2007, August. Yes, I did have to dig through the old Celtic views to find it. And obviously, I don't think anybody's going to get the answer right. But if you're tuning in, it was Hayley Cunningham who scored the first ever goal, and that took place up at Barrowfield. in front of around 200 fans, as I say, August 2007, 16 years ago, against Hamilton. They beat us 2-1. The manager at that time was John Holt. And when you look at the progression from that moment to last night, it's sensational. But very much like Alan, I would love to see the coordination of this to ensure that the progression continues, Lloyd. I mean, it could be a Friday night thing up at Barrowfield if the park was up there, for example. I know they've spoken about redeveloping it up there, where you can go and look at the stars of the future and also go and watch the women's team. But I think what's key to this is your season ticket should get you into these games as well, all the time. I know that was the situation last night.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be looked at, and I agree with Alan in the point that it should just all come under one product as a club. If you do Barrowfield up, get the stand in there, maybe 10,000 max, decent enough for B team, youth team, women's team, free season ticket. It'd be great. I think you'd get a lot more fans in there rather than doing it at a 60,000 seater stadium, where obviously, yeah, last night was great with the Celtic end, looked fantastic, but then you've got the supporters spread out all the way throughout the stadium, whereas you can create a far better atmosphere if they're all just kind of crammed in a bit. So yeah, that looks a bit better.
It does. By the way, I think it also gets the younger players who are going to be progressing, hopefully, to play at full Celtic Park, that atmosphere and the experience of playing to a crowd, because I'm pretty sure that is completely different. And that might dominate some of the conversations today, Brian, because we will be playing to a crowd tomorrow, but it will be an exclusively red, white and blue crowd because there's no Celtic fans there. Now, during the week, I know Alan will remember this because we're of a certain vintage, Alan, you and I. But the last time I recall, and other than COVID, that we did this at Ibrox was in 1994, and they won each game when John Collins scored the free kick with these Adidas Predators, and Celtic fans were banned from Ibrox that day by David Murray because he blamed us for causing £8,000 of damage to seats in the previous fixture, Brian. Slightly different this time round. There's a lot of politics around the reasons why Celtic fans won't be in the stadium tomorrow. But let's talk a wee bit about that before we get into the nitty-gritty team selection and how we see the game going. It's one of these matches that, there is a backdrop of the two clubs failing to not communicate, but failing to come to a resolution. And I think it's important not to forget the facts in that Celtic weren't happy with the situation, that the allocation had gone below the 7.5 that it used to be. And they had gone to Rangers to try and seek a resolution because they mentioned the fan experience, if you can call it that, being 700 or 750 fans in that wee area of the park. But also there was fan safety concerns. And that's what it came down to. Rangers refused to increase the allocation for reasons only known to them. You can speculate. I would speculate that they've sold the seats to season ticket holders. And so Celtic said, well, it's 7.5 or nothing. And incidentally, you won't be getting any tickets for Celtic Park. So that's where we are. So we go into this game with that as the backdrop, Brian Degnan. What does that add, or what does it take away from tomorrow's fixture?
So I think, generally speaking, I prefer it. I always think it's better with both teams. I thought the Scottish Cup semi there, the atmosphere was really good. I always think it adds so much to the occasion from a sort of, we talk a lot about the sort of branding and how to market the Scottish game and how to market these big games. And, the Celtic Rangers is still for me the biggest derby in the world. And I think it's better with both sets of fans. I really do. I'd get if, you're at Celtic Park and we're smashing them about and it's all Celtic fans, a great atmosphere. But watching it, I always think there's a bit taken away. That being said, I think the 700 was always nonsense. And if any fan, regardless of what club they support, whether it's Celtic, Rangers, whoever, if any fan's in danger at a game, then it's not good enough. People's safety is far more important than anything else. So when and I know obviously there's certain fans that make worse behaviour than others, but I think it was right that the 700 is abolished. That's nonsense. There is always that thing with these sort of discussions that could Celtic I took the sort of the higher ground and said, no, well, we'll allow you in and we'll show you how petty you are. I don't know. It feels like the whole thing feels a wee bit sort of he said, she said, doesn't it? I mean, you feel bad saying it because it feels like we got better, but they kind of started it, and we just kind of went on and went back and forth. And look, I get, if I was a Rangers fan, I wouldn't want to have to watch Celtic celebrate spanking mate every single time we played, but I think that's what it was coming down to. In terms of the atmosphere tomorrow, I actually don't think it'll affect the players. I think Postecoglou's team have shown that as much as the crowd's always good and it does galvanises, I don't think we need it to play our football and play it that way. You know, I think you saw that the last time we played at Ibrox, and certainly in the 3-2 game, the 2-1 game, and Carter Vickers scored. You know, we didn't need that to galvanise us. We can go there with the winning mentality and do the job and play our football regardless of the atmosphere. Whereas I actually think if we score early, for example, their fans will turn on them. And I think it's more detrimental to Rangers, if I'm honest, having a stadium full of their own fans, because they've got on their back and it's just jeers on, in my opinion.
Well, let's look at the circumstances then, right? Because, you know, you could understand if it was going to gain your advantage, Alan, right? You're looking at your home stadium, and we know that we've seen it twice now against Rangers where it's been exclusively Celtic fans. The atmosphere is absolutely electric. In particular, I think, in the February game last year. But under the circumstances, it's not really going to be working along those lines for Rangers, is it? Because not only is the team not doing too well, Celtic are going for a treble. And as Brian says, if we get the upper hand in this game, do you expect the Ibrox crowd to get right behind their side? Or do you think they'll turn on their side? I mean, there's a situation where if Celtic click into the gear that I don't think they have done in the last 3 games against Rangers, then if we do and we take a couple of goals late, there's going to be faded blue seats all over Ibrox, I think.
So, Bolly, are you asking me whether the Ibrox crowd will be revolting?
Yes, I am. Yeah, good choice of words. Good choice. Yeah, absolutely. That's before the kickoff.
This all started through classic Dave King hubris, okay? And as you know, as Brian said, it was because they got sick of 7,000 Celtic fans lording it up and enjoying victories there, and then by moving some of their ultras, season ticket holders, into that section, they've basically boxed themselves into a corner now, and there's no easy way out for them really. And I think Celtic have responded, I think, is the only way that they could. I'm really concerned about tomorrow, just from a safety perspective, the safety of our players and our staff, because it's been shown that going to Ibrox, that Chris Sutton's safety couldn't be guaranteed going there.
Yeah.
One of the Celtic staff was hit by a bottle thrown from the corporate section at Ibrox, and a gentleman is now in prison for that. Somebody, we don't know who, but somebody managed to sprinkle glass in the penalty area a few games ago, that Joe Hart had to get sorted out. We've seen Bruni being attacked on the pitch in the past. I've got no confidence that Celtic staff and players' safety will be guaranteed tomorrow. That's my main concern. We know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a crowd that's going to, like you say, it's almost no win for them. If they win the game, it changes nothing. It changes absolutely nothing. It might make people feel good for a few days, and there'll be streams of stuff in the press about how Mickey Beale has got the better over Ange, and that will be the case next season, and all this nonsense. But essentially, it doesn't change a single thing in terms of the fundamental strengths of the squad, the capabilities of the respective managers, and the ability of both teams to grow their squads next season, given the enormous financial advantage that Celtic now have. So none of those things are going to change if Celtic lose. But as you rightly say, if Celtic do go ahead, Mickey Beale is naked and alone there on the touchline with 50,000 revolting bears screaming and shouting at him, and that's not going to be pleasant for him. So
Either way, that's not what I want to hear on a Friday.
What, naked Michael Beale?
Naked Beale and revolting bears. It's not ideal.
Either way, I'm concerned that in the sense that it's gonna. If I say it's getting ugly, I'm stating the obvious, but you know what I mean.
No, you're right. Back in the day, a lot of the highbrow newspapers used to have brilliant cartoonists, political parodies and all this kind of stuff. And you have just painted a picture very similar to that, Alan, with a naked Michael Beale, 50,000 bears revolting. But yes, we are looking at the safety. There is a serious issue here, Lloyd. We've spoken about it. Some of the examples that Alan gives there. I mean, even when they won the league, they rieted. And you're looking at the situation, there's going to be so much frustration, pent-up anger at what's going on. And, not all of them, surely not all of them thinks that this is just ticking along nicely. They've got this massive budget and they're going to rebuild in the summer. I mean, there's going to be a frustration there. The biggest frustration being that Celtic are heading towards a treble this season. Someone shared a graphic, and it was every league. It was the crest graphic, every league winner since 2000. And it's unbelievable when you look at it like that. The level of domination since the year 2000, Celtic over Rangers. It looks like a Connect 4 kind of board, and at no point can you connect any 4 Rangers crests. But at plenty of times you can do it with the Celtic crest. We are dominating this football club, Lloyd. And, my real fear is it's no passion, it's the anger that might spill out tomorrow. And you know what? Alan said something earlier about if it's not safe, then perhaps that's one of the reasons. It's not safe, so the fans can't be there. If it's not safe, then the authorities should be asking why it's not safe. Because if it's not safe, they shouldn't get a safety certificate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's a valid point that Alan makes and yourself make there, Paul. We've seen it recently at Celtic Park with stewarding and that around the pitch and that, as if fans are going to invade the pitch. But then if fans can do that at Ibrox and harm one of our players, then how do they get safety certificates still? So these safety concerns do come into the game tomorrow because, as Brian and Alan have rightly said, Celtic score first, 50,000 angry bears. I don't think they're all going to want to sit and just point at their manager. So it's one that really the Police Scotland and the government and the SFA really do need to look at. Is why is this one club still getting away with these things? Because
that's
they just don't seem to deal with it.
Yeah, I've called it a cauldron. I mean, last night was all that is good about a fan experience. It was something that was synchronised, that was organised, and it was brilliant that Fran's team got that level of support. How big a part of that, spurred them on to that result. I'm pretty sure there is an element of it. There must be an element of that, the chemistry, the energy, the positive energy that must give to the players. And of course, they beat the league leaders 3-1 at home. So fantastic result. It's going to be completely the opposite tomorrow. And there are concerns, and I hope that we can talk after the game and it has gone without any kind of incident in relation to safety concerns, Brian. But we do want to talk also about the team we'll be putting on the park, how you see the game going. And I said before, I don't think we've performed particularly well, other than when we gave them a doing 4-0 at the beginning of the season. I don't think we've performed particularly well in other games, but we have come out unscathed. Do you think the shackles are off now? We've won the league. Shackles are off. We can play with a wee bit more freedom, express ourselves a wee bit more, and we might see a performance that we know Angie's team can give us.
Yeah, well, I think tomorrow, I think mentality is going to come into play because from Rangers' perspective, they desperately need a win to salvage any sort of pride and get the press to, as Al alluded to, sort of back them in. I mean, if they win tomorrow, the press will tell them they've won the league next season and they started yet. So they're desperate for that sort of validation. Mikey Beale needs that. He needs a win. There's no doubt about that. And, just the fact that he's no longer in the door, don't let anyone tell you that there's no doubts about his future already, especially if he loses tomorrow. So that pressure's all on them. Now, we've saw in games where they've had must-win games this season and they've choked. Regardless of the performance, they've choked. We've saw it through, again, regardless of performance. I think tomorrow we can go there pressure-free and take advantage of that. I think we score early, we start well, or it looks like even if it gets to half-time and they've not scored, I think it's a toxic atmosphere. And I think the pressure's on their players far more. I think they'll crumble. In terms of our performances, it's interesting because I think back to the 3-2 game, and that was people saying, Rangers played the better team, and they had all that narrative of we never, Celtic never won the game, we lost, all that nonsense. But even on that day, more possession, better passing, more shots at goal, more goals scored. So we've been better than them. We've just not been vintage Ange. And I think, when we look at how well we've played at times, there's even a bit of a drop-off, it seems quite stark. But I think tomorrow we can go there, play with freedom, play with bravery, play with that strong mentality we've got, and I think we'll see it off, because I generally think they've shown for years they just don't have the mentality to cope with that pressure and that expectation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear from Alan's perspective. Alan, you analyse the game in a slightly different way from many of us. And, there's one thing to say that the gap is massive. And I believe over the piece, and I'm not just talking about the team on the park, I think between the two clubs, the gap is massive. If you want to get right into the financials of it, the recruitment strategy, the assets on the park, the money in the bank, the whole shebang. But we have had some very close encounters with them this season. There's no getting away from that. There's no denying it. And I think Jim Walsh spoke about it the other week there, whereby the gap in these games hasn't been massive. I agree with Brian. I think we've been a better team. We've done enough to get what we needed from each of the encounters. But it hasn't been that vintage 4-0. It's not been the vintage 3-0 last February that we have seen Celtic, the performances that we have seen from Celtic against Rangers. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, Alan, why is that? How are Rangers lining up and shaping up against Celtic? How are they able to do us a bit of damage? How are they able to stop us sometimes in our tracks? They have been difficult games. We can't take that away from the encounters. They are the second best team in the country. They're the biggest challenge we're going to get, biggest challenge we're going to face. But what is it they're doing, Alan, that prevents us from playing that fluid football that we're used to?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, they clearly are, simply the second best, but easily the second best club in the league. And it is also fair to say that the actual matches this season have been, by any measure, objectively, subjectively, have been very close. Now, I've written about this because, again, context is everything, right? So I would make the case that in every single derby this season, there has been a greater pressure on the Ibrox club than there has been on Celtic. The first game of the season, Van Bronckhorst comes to Celtic Park. He's lost the league. He has to get off to a good start. He has to put Celtic under pressure, and they get ripped apart. Mickey's first game at Ibrox, Celtic have got a big lead in the league. This is their chance to really start clawing it back and make the second half of the season a close one. You've then got the League Cup final. Mickey's got to get off the mark, win his first trophy, take the pressure off, etc. And then you've then got the 3-2 game. This is the last chance. They've got to get something out of this game, or the league has gone. And then, of course, you've got the Scottish Cup semi-final, the last chance for silverware. If we don't win this, it's looking odds on to be a Celtic treble. So I would argue every single game this season, the pressure's been on them to do it. They have got very close, but they haven't got it over the line in any of those games. And so that you've got to see the closeness of the data and the closeness of the outcome in the context of where the pressure lay in each of those games. And it's similar going into tomorrow. He has to get off the mark, Mickey, against Celtic. They have to give their fans a reason to renew their season tickets for next season, or they're really in trouble. So they have to have some good news there. Celtic, they're preparing for a cup final. They're looking to give players who haven't played there some experience of that sort of atmosphere. To go back to your question around how have they done that, I think it's fair to say that Mickey's tried pretty much everything in these games. He hasn't had one tactical approach. He's tried many different configurations. But what has been interesting is that his mindset and his what he's been trying to achieve is really been all about stopping Celtic rather than answering the conundrum of how do we break down Celtic and score goals. So the way that I think he's settled on, and that has been very successful and it has disrupted Celtic, is to play more of a sort of diamond shape. Now, when I was coaching and grassroots and all that sort of thing, to me, the diamond is always the 4-4-2 diamond is almost like a safe place. It's like a very solid structure. And if you want to make a team, who might be struggling, you want to make them harder to beat. I think the 4-4-2 diamond's a really good system to play. You're very compact in the middle of the pitch. Your midfield players are close to each other, so the relationships and the distances between the players is less, so you can move the ball between them a lot easier. You obviously give up a lot of space on the flanks, but generally speaking, there's less danger the wider the ball is.
Mhm.
So that's how I think he'll set up tomorrow. He's obviously gone very aggressive in the press. I think the issue that he's had there is that they've pressed really effectively in all these games, but tended to drift off the later the game goes because they can't maintain the intensity of that press, and he doesn't have the quality on the bench to come on and supplement it. And then the other problem that he's had is he's done very well to really restrict Celtic in terms of building play through midfield. And he's been heavily reliant on his two fullbacks, as they are. Their two fullbacks are the most creative players in that team, and they're relying on getting the ball wide and getting a lot of crosses into the box. But really, when it's come down to it, if you look at those games, they've almost relied totally on corners and free kicks to cause Celtic trouble. We know Celtic aren't the biggest team in the world. We're not been conceding more goals from corners and free kicks than we necessarily should. Karl Stauffer in particular. I know people who watch the Huddle know that I'm very critical of him, but what I would say is he is a superb penalty box defender. He always seems to get something on the ball. But just through attrition, chances have been created against Celtic by exploiting those kind of situations. But what they haven't been able to do is really cut through Celtic the way that Celtic did in, for example, the League Cup final, where they were able to take advantage of what is quite a lot of weaknesses in their back four, especially Ben Davis, to really take advantage of some poor defending. And he's got to rouse a squad of players, the most storied of which he's already more or less kicked out the door, and some of them are fighting for the future. Some of them maybe don't want to be there. So it's a tough ask for Mickey, and he's a rookie manager, so it's a really big job that he has there to get that team up for it. And then how does he respond, as I say, if Celtic do go a goal down and the crowd turn? But what he has done, and credit where it's due, is he has stopped Celtic playing to a decent degree, but not to the extent that he's been able to win what have been must-win games for him.
Yeah, no, brilliantly summarised there, Alan. And I want to talk about the midfield at some point, because it seems, even to the untrained eye like myself watching the game, that's where the issue's been. That's because a lot of what we do, you could argue that it starts from the two centre halves, but a lot of what we do happens there in the engine room. And I want to talk about, who we actually choose to start that particular game. There's loads of talent in the midfield. Lloyd, before I ask you about your midfield, I'm going to ask you, if you're a Celtic player and you open the scoring, how do you celebrate? Because we obviously seen Jota doing his magnificent, iconic celebration in front of the Rangers fans in the semi-final. Maybe not a good idea to do that, but it's spontaneous, isn't it? It's spontaneous.
It is, aye.
Would you have the bravery? Would you have the bravery and the heart to give it a bit of that? I said yesterday it would be good if someone was to score, to go right up to the dugout, go right up to Ange, everybody, the staff, the players, they can all celebrate there. I'm not going to say it's any safer, but safety in numbers and all that kind of stuff. That's what I would do. I mean, the corporate section of Ibrox isn't safe either. Alan's already pointed that out. So those in the club deck might still have bottles of beer to hurl at you. But how do you celebrate? I mean, you're entitled to. You can't do the old Brian McClare, grab the ball out the net and run back up to the penalty, the kickoff spot, the centre spot, do you? So
no, you can't. I think I need to go Peter Grant style with that one, to be honest.
Oh yes. You've gone full Peter Grant. What about you, Brian?
Well, me personally, no, I'd probably be too feared, but I imagine the players will just... the problem is, where do you celebrate? Because you can only celebrate in front of the Rangers fans, right? So I suppose it doesn't really matter. I don't want to go full Peter Grant to say if it was me, I'd probably not do that. But I suspect the players will just, celebrate, turn their back, celebrate with each other and move on. But it would be good to see something really controversial. Like, I feel like Ralston would do something mental. Yeah. I feel like he's got potential to do something like that if he scores. So part of me would like that. but they'd be anxious for the next amount of time he was on the park.
I'd like to see the Mikko Lustig coming back, Alan. You know, the jersey over the head. Well, I mean, seriously, what do they do? Did we even prepare for it? Did they talk about that? You know, what happens? Because remember, we've heard in the past about like the match commander, whoever's the highest ranking cop at the game, going into dressing rooms before games and giving players pep talks as to their behaviour on the park. I mean, is this a consideration? Because, I mean, I don't think we can understate the safety.
No seriousness, I think it will be. I mean, for me, if Celtic score, then it's a team huddle. It has to be. It's got to be.
In the centre circle.
On the answer. But yeah, I'm sure they'll be told, listen, not to incite, because it doesn't take a lot, as we know. So and that would be, I'm sure something like that will be said. So, but yeah, for me, a team huddle. That's the only answer.
Superb. I'm looking forward to it.
Just pull a flag for somewhere and run about.
Oh, I thought you meant
just go in that corner and just wave the flag at it.
Go do full Graham Souness. That's what we want. Celtic green and white flag in the centre circle.
I can't wait to see what Jota does when he opens the scoring. Right, here we go. Jungle Lion, Celtic Football Club is relentless, and so are you, because more often than not, you're the first commenter on this YouTube stream. So thank you very much. We're heading towards 800 on the live. I've got an announcement to make today as well. And by the way, we did run a competition at the beginning of the week where we gave the wrong answer the prize. And I've got to say, Francie W has come back and says, listen, guys, he won it. Take the prize back, give it to the correct winner, but we've not heard back from the correct winner yet, so it might still be coming to you, Franny. I've got all your details. The Urban Culture, that noise rattled the Glasgow defence last night in the second half, brought memories of the old Celtic end when Celtic were shooting into it in the second half and the crowd roared the Celts on. I do believe that the energy and the chemistry created can make a big difference. Paddy, welcome back to the show. Abada to score tomorrow. I want to talk about Abada now. We ran a blog. Acsom.net is the Acsom blog. It's been alive for many, many years, but we're now focusing on bringing you regular content on there as well. And there was a blog during the week talking, in fact, yesterday, about Abada and about Hatate Allen, because there's a tendency for some people in the mainstream to try and talk Celtic players out the building as soon as they start performing. Abada, there's been a lot of speculation, but he came out and spoke about it. I don't know what weight you put behind him saying he's happy in Glasgow. If Celtic get a bid of X amount, whatever that X amount is, the threshold, Abada will probably leave the building. However, it's great to hear that he came out and said he's happy. Is that an area of the park, though, that we should be strengthening? Because a couple of the players that have been linked, and I know that it's only links, have been playing on the right-hand side. Is Abada a player you'd keep beyond this season? He's a player I think needs to still develop. Even if he stays, do we need to strengthen on the right now that James A. Forrest is kind of out the picture as well? He's not played much this season. So what's your thoughts on Abada in that area of the park, Alan?
Well, if you take the view that your benchmark is being top of the SPFL and beating the Rangers, then you might want to keep all these players. But if your view is that your benchmark is progressing in Europe, then to me, every player in the squad is fair game. And in fact, the only way that Celtic are going to grow and improve their squad is, this is Ange that said this, not me, is to increase the volume of churn in the squad, to sell more players more aggressively for higher amounts of money and bring in gradually more and better players to replace them, given the money that you make on those deals. That's the only way a club like Celtic can grow the quality of the squad. And listen, as much as we love those players that we have today, because they're not just a good football team, they're also a good bunch of lads. They're a really likeable bunch, and we all like them, right? But the reality is, if Celtic are going to grow, we're going to have to get used to selling players that we all like and adore. It's the only way we're going to improve the team. I mean, specifically on Abada, despite the fact he's been used mainly as a sub this season, his improvement statistically, his data, if you like, is remarkable. And that probably might surprise me when I looked at it, and it might surprise others. But actually, it looks to me like a player who's continuing to improve. So I would want to keep him because I think he's got a higher ceiling, and I'm sure he will leave at some point. But as you said, is he still got some development to do, and is now the optimum time to sell him? So this is a judgment. This is where Celtic need to be, to not get into the situation that they are across the city with Morelos and Kent, where you're letting
There is a ruthlessness, and I think that from day one, Ange has almost prepared us and normalised that, Lloyd. Because we're football fans. We fall in love with players. That's what we do. That's to be expected, and we've done it time and time again. And we've been disappointed many times over the length of time you've watched Celtic. But when you think of a player like Abada, and what Alan says, I totally agree with. I don't think he's hit the peak that he can hit at Celtic. And then with that comes the peak of his value as well. He might be, I'm not going to say agitating for a move, but he might be keen on a move. He spoke about a move, I think, in one of his first ever press conferences, that his dream was to play for Liverpool. Cheers, mate. I remember reading Pat McGinley back in the 90s. Remember him? Pat McGinley talking in the Celtic programme, and I was really cheesed off with him as a 12 or 13-year-old boy, because it was, talking about Celtic and the teams that you'd want to play for. He says, the question was, who did you want to play for when you were a boy? He said AC Milan. And I thought, no, you want to play for Celtic, mate. But obviously times have changed. I was disappointed in him. Times have changed, and Abada might have one eye on the glitz and the glamour of the EPL, Lloyd. But in terms of two things, actually. Firstly, we've seen him coming back into the side as of late. Does he feature tomorrow? And if so, is he a starter? And secondly, is he a player that you would try and keep for next season, because his ceiling isn't yet matched or met? I mean, he's played 96 games. He could hit 100 for Celtic before the end of this campaign. Alan looks deeper into the stats and the figures and the data, and it looks as though he's improved in the second half of the season. And I think there's more improvement to come from him. So do we keep him? And also, do you play him tomorrow from the start?
Yeah, the first part of the question, I would start Abada tomorrow, because I do like to see him put Barisic on his backside now and again, so that's always a good viewing. I would like to keep him next season, but like guys are saying, obviously if valuation's met, he is more likely to go, and if it is rumoured to be around about the 10 million mark, then I don't really see us keeping him, to be honest.
The 10 million mark, it's an interesting kind of situation, because we all have an idea of what we value a player at. And obviously there was loads of discussions around the transfer fees for Juranovic and Giakoumakis. I just think as a 21-year-old with the amount of football under his belt that he's got, Brian, that 10 million's a bit of a snip for a player like that. And I would feel a wee bit hard done by if I'm Celtic and I'm selling a player like Abada for 10 million.
Yeah, I think so, but to be honest, that's one of those things that I kind of always feel. I always think Celtic undervalue. I think it's very rare someone's went for more than I would have thought they were worth. I think, but in saying that, you don't know what the contract's like, you don't know the ins and outs of it, you don't know what they're willing to take. It's like the Juranovic thing. Yeah, Croatian international, World Cup quarter-finalist, and he goes for what, 8 million? And you think, surely not. Mm-hmm. But we don't know the ins and outs, so I think I kind of agree with Alan though. I think but I wouldn't have normally. But I think since Ange's come in, I completely trust the recruitment system to replace. I mentioned Juranovic there. If you look at Alistair Johnson, I think he's an upgrade. I think that's a wonderful piece of business. And I think we've got good business, with Juranovic, got success with him, made a profit and got a better player. And if that's the mould you're going to do it, I've spoke a few times and I've said that I think a goalkeeper is really essential for us next year. I think if we want to, and to Alan's point earlier, is the benchmark the SPFL, or is the benchmark Europe, and trying to progress a bit further in Europe? And for me, it has to be Europe. And I think to get there, I think we need to replace guys like Joe Hart, as much as we all love him and as much as he's been great. And I think that goes for everyone in the park. Now, in previous years, I might have said, "Oh, you can't lose him; he's too key. Can't lose him; he's too key." But I genuinely believe under Ange, regardless of who goes, they'll be replaced, and they'll be replaced well. And I think part of that is not just good recruitment. I think it's also the fact the system is so important. I think the system's almost more important than the individual at times. I think you can see that when we rotate. The drop in quality isn't huge in comparison to the drop in quality in an individual player. So if Haksabanovic comes in for Jota, there is a bit of a drop-off. But it's not that much of a drop-off. It really affects the game too much. Whereas if you look at Jota versus Haksabanovic as a player ability, there is a big gap. I hope that makes sense. So I think if a guy like Abada goes, he'll go with best wishes and I'll be confident we'll replace him. In terms of starting tomorrow, I would start him because I think our best front line is still Jota, Kyogo and Abada. Now, I'm always a wee bit critical of Maeda just because I can see what he does and know how important he is, but he's so frustrating for me to watch in an attacking sense. So for me, the best front three is still Kyogo, Abada and Jota, and I would play my best front three tomorrow. I don't think Ange will rotate just for rotation's sake. But you may find younger guys get more, come on for the last 10, 15, 20 minutes now with less pressure. But I think tomorrow, start with them.
See, this is interesting. I'm going to throw this to Alan and get your view on it, Alan, because we tend to view certain players in different ways as fans. And I think of Abada, I think about his previous performances against Rangers, and he really has performed well against them. Jota, for me, is undroppable. He's having an unbelievable season. How he never got into the SPFL Team of the Year, I will never know. But then on the left-hand side, and I'm disagreeing with Brian and Lloyd here, I'm playing Maeda. And I think it's because this fixture requires a Maeda. It requires the energy. It requires the work rate. You mentioned two of their most attacking or most dangerous players being the two fullbacks. And I think Maeda does a great deal to try and nullify one of those threats. So I'm going to say up top, Kyogo, left Maeda, right Jota, and go against the other two lads today. What do you think, Alan? How do you play it?
Yeah, no, I don't think the manager's one for throwing, curveballs. I think he's relatively predictable in his lineups, and I think he'll go as strong as he can tomorrow. And so that means I think the current front three, as you said, Paul, and I completely agree with you in terms of what Maeda has been very successful in those games is to be able to shut down Tavernier, getting forward. He's clearly, he's their best attacking player, actually. He's certainly the most creative. He's a good crosser of the ball, and he's also a goal threat as well, as we know. So, Maeda is very effective at counteracting that threat. So I think for that reason alone he'll play. Maeda's form has definitely dropped off after the World Cup. He was sensational. And he almost, his metrics took an enormous leap forward from where they had before the World Cup. But he's just kind of fallen off a bit. It could be fatigue. He's had a full season and a World Cup, and all that entails, and both physically and emotionally. On top of that, so the guy, and just because of the way he plays, he's. I know you joke about him being plugged in at night, but in all seriousness, he is a human underneath that robotic performance levels. He is a human. I'm sure it's cumulatively catching up on him a little bit, and he has been falling off. And I did wonder, would you throw Abada in? But he's only just back from what has been a bit of a hamstring injury, I think. So I think all that being said, it will be Maeda for Kyogo and Jota on the right, I think, and Abada will be there to come on and hopefully, as I say, put Barisic on his bum again.
Exactly. I love the fact that there's 4 of us on this show and we've divided it right down the middle. Me and Alan's on one side, you guys are on the other. That's what it's all about. And you look at some of the comments coming in and it's exactly the same. Derek Smith, Jota is much more dangerous on the right. And Chloe Toy comes in to say Maeda is a better defender from the front than Abada. And then Mo Sislak, Maeda must start. Yes, start Abada too. Where does Jota fit in on that one? Alan, you were going to make a point there?
Sorry,
Jota,
just
maybe?
to answer that first question. Yeah, the first question about Jota, right or left. So I did do some analysis on this earlier in the season, and to boil it down really simply, if he plays on the right, he's more creative. He's obviously going down the wing on his right foot. He's getting more crosses in. If he plays on the left, he's more of a goal threat. Obviously, he's cutting in. He's taking more shots. It's that simple. He's actually, surprisingly, and it surprised me, his overall stats are slightly better if he starts off the right, but goal threat greater on the left. So sorry, just chuck that in.
No, it was a question I was maybe going to ask. Another thing I was going to ask you, Alan, is I don't know if you've got enough data on O yet to tell us some of the strengths and weaknesses of him. He's a player that he's come in. I think you've seen a physical transformation in him, very similar to what we've seen with Hatate. It's quite clear that he's a lot leaner than he was when he came into the club. If you look, even just at the weekend there when he was behind Ange Postecoglou. I don't know if you've seen that interview that Ange was given, and there's all behind him. Brilliant. You've got to look it up. And obviously there's been this discussion about the Juranovic to Johnson. Brian thinks that's an upgrade. And then obviously the other discussion would be Giakoumakis to O. Have we seen enough of O to make a judgment on that, Alan?
Well, he's played the equivalent of about 4 games worth of 90 minutes, so still a way to go, if I'm honest, in terms of jumping to, making any sort of firm assessment based on having a decent sample of data. What we've seen so far, I think, is encouraging, but what I would say is that largely he's being used as a substitute. And as I've written about this season, spoken about a number of times, there's a huge dividend that you get from coming on as a sub for Celtic, because you're generally coming on the last 30 minutes of games against opposition that have had like 30% of the ball, if they're lucky, have been pressed relentlessly for 60 minutes. I've had Kyogo, trying to keep up with Kyogo for 60 minutes. Where the hell is he? And then you come on, and Giakoumakis' stats were better than Kyogo's, not because he's a better player, it was because he got that substitute dividend. That freshness against tiring opposition, and always benefited from that, no doubt. And his numbers are actually very good for a striker in terms of all the attacking metrics are actually excellent. But it's only a small sample, and you have to understand the context. But certainly very promising is what I would say so far. But we need to see him. Obviously, again, more data, and we need to see him tested against better opponents, because sometimes he looks incredibly raw. His touch, his decision making, all the things you'd expect from a young player. But what he has that Ange clearly absolutely loves is an absolutely iron will to work hard, to succeed, to be the best he can be. To put himself about the pitch, to try and score goals. And Ange loves that. He absolutely loves that attitude. And similarly, we see that in Alistair Johnson. Is he an upgrade? I would say yes, he is an upgrade. His defensive data is more like Lustig's. And if you think of Lustig, I would characterize Lustig as being a fullback who profiled like a centre back, because he really was. I think if you put Lustig on the right of a back three, would probably have been his optimal position. And similar again to Lustig. Whereas obviously Lustig wasn't going to dance down the wing or sprint forward with the ball like Juranovic does, and a bit like Frimpong, and cover ground quickly, which a lot of clubs really love that attribute. Lustig was actually a very good long passer of the ball. And Johnson's packing stats, I talk about packing is passing through the opposition players, are exceptional, absolutely exceptional, probably the highest in the squad. So that could settle down. We need to see him against European level opposition, all that on the table. But Johnson, to me, is definitely an upgrade as I look at it today. And I think he's going to be the sort of player that we need to get into the squad to make us better in Europe, because as well as his abilities on the ball, as well as his better defensive instincts than Juranovic, and the likes of Frimpong, obviously, he's got that athleticism, he's got that strength, he's got that speed, he's got that attitude and desire and commitment. All those things are important. We'll have to be packaged together to make a player that's going to make a mark in the European level. So he's a big upgrade for me as well. Sorry, was there a third question? I can't
do you think, actually, you're talking there about do you think that even with O and Kyogo, two completely different styles of player, that we need a third striker in the summer? We need to go out, and that's something that will be on the kind of priority list, Alan.
Yeah, I think if Kyogo's injured and you're going into a Champions League group stage game with O, I don't think that's going to be a good situation to be in. No harm to the kid, and he might step up to that level. I don't know, but it would certainly be a risk. So you're either going to say, well, okay, I've got Abada and I've got Maeda, who I think can both do a really good job as a central striker, and that's essentially your cover, or you get another one in. So I don't know. I mean, it's a big drop. I think it's a big drop down from Kyogo, put it that way. And is that really good enough for a Champions League campaign? Probably not.
No, I'd agree with that. Talking of celebrating goals tomorrow, Brian and Lloyd. Brian would play it safe. Lloyd would get on his knees and bless himself. Peter Grant-esque 1987 and the 2-2 game that resulted in people going to court and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, Granty was blamed for starting it, lighting the blue torch paper. Poor Granty. He was just celebrating a goal. And it was a Terry Butcher own goal as well. Right, I get the impression, though, guys, that if O was to come on and score a goal, he wouldn't be able to help himself. He seems to have that about him. The tap would be off. He'd be running to a corner flag. He would, wouldn't he? There's no way he would be playing it down, Lloyd, would he?
No, he's not. Was it against Hibs he done that as well, I'm sure?
Yeah. So,
I mean, he'd go out.
I like him as a player, but I also think there's a bit about him, Brian. I loathe to call anybody arrogant, but sometimes you need a wee bit of an edge. I think he's got that.
Any good, strong professional footballer has that. I think you have to have supreme confidence in your ability, especially if you're young. Alan alluded to that iron will. I think the players that you see in their squad that are developing have got that. I think Ralston, if you look at the transformation in him, that's just as much about his desire to improve as it is, his coaching. I think Taylor was the same. And I think you see that when the pressure's down. It goes back to my point about mentality at the start. I think even if we're not playing well, there's that desire to just refuse to get beat. And I think that's in abundance. And I think O's got that. I do think, again, as Al said, he is very raw at times. But I think there's a player there. And I think, we spoke about Johnson as well there. Once these guys get a full pre-season under them as well, I expect everyone to be an upgrade again next season. The same way that I think Jota's been better than last season, Taylor's been better than last season, Hatate's certainly been better than last season. So expect that again next season, regardless of who's there and who isn't. In terms of the squad tomorrow, the only change I would maybe like to see is Iwata starting and McGregor pushing forward a little bit, just purely because, Al touched on it earlier, Rangers, they'll try and stop us playing. They'll be pressing, and I think Iwata's will be maybe I'm wrong, Al will be able to tell me, but I feel like he's going to be better at breaking up attacks defensively than McGregor. I think McGregor's turnover's going to be better, as it always is, but I think Iwata breaking it up and then giving it to McGregor and Hatate, say, to move forward, or O'Reilly for his physicality. I think that's a midfield three I'd like to see, but I don't expect any changes. But I think Iwata's got a huge upside, as does Kobayashi, actually, for his pace at the back.
So you're looking Iwata, McGregor and O'Reilly, or is it Iwata, McGregor, Hatate?
O'Reilly, just for his defensive attributes as well and his physicality, with Hatate coming on for that creative edge, and you could drop McGregor back later. Yeah.
Well, I'll come to you guys, Alan and Lloyd. Lloyd, I think we've maybe spoken about this before. I'm of the belief, and this is just something that, when we beat them 3-2, I felt that, that battle that Alan spoke about at the top of the show, I'm not saying we were losing it, but obviously they were stifling us in the midfield. And the change that was made was Moy for Iwata. And I think Moy was struggling, but, he probably shouldn't have started that game because he wasn't right at the peak of his fitness and sharpness at that point. Iwata comes on and we look completely different. We get the second goal, I think, 2 minutes after he comes on the park. And then we extend the lead to 3-1 and we look to be controlling it until we make another tranche of substitutions. So with that in mind, and I know that you can't basically base everything on a 30-minute performance or a 20-minute performance. I felt that we really managed the midfield when Iwata came in, and he was alongside McGregor and O'Reilly for that period of the game. So I tend to agree with Brian, and not because I want to drop Hatate. I love Hatate. I've been saying he's been the player of the year all season. Love him. But tomorrow, I just think based on the sharpness element of O'Reilly and McGregor playing a lot of games and the way that Iwata seemed to shore up really well when he came on, that's my midfield trio, Lloyd. What about yourself? So I'm agreeing with Brian on this one.
I'm also agreeing with Brian that one. I think it's that midfield three's got a great balance to it, with especially Iwata sitting. And I think he just lets McGregor go that bit forward and make a bit more impact in the game as well. So, yep, that's my midfield three for tomorrow.
And by the way, I feel pretty harsh saying it because Hatate's had some big performances against Rangers, Alan. I just don't feel that he's at that peak in terms of his sharpness at the moment. He's coming back in a bit like Moy as well. I think we've seen a wee bit of that from Moy. He's maybe getting there. Now, again, that was my kind of analysis of the game from the casual observer, if you like, Alan, when Iwata came on in the 3-2 game. Is there another reason for that we looked a lot stronger in midfield when he came on?
So I think there's a lot going on here. So listen, the manager's not infallible, right? Believe it or not. So I think a couple of missteps in terms of selections. You know, you mentioned there Moy being selected in that 3-2 game when he looked a long way off being match fit, and you know, it was quite a painful performance actually, the way he was being caught out and giving the ball away. And similarly, the decision to play Hatate in the semi-final, I think, you know, equally was not a good decision. He didn't look ready to play that intensity of game. I thought he looked better, Hatate, against Hearts, and obviously the assist was fantastic, but there was an awful lot of things just breaking down in the final third as well that went on before that. So, you know, and is Iwata the answer? Well, again, Iwata's got about 4 games worth of minutes in his legs for Celtic. It's, you know, I've seen some stuff that I really love. I've seen him, you know, sometimes give the ball away quite a bit as well. So I'm kind of, you know, not made up my mind on that one as well. So I think it's a real conundrum. If both Moy and Hatate are not fully up to match speed, then, you know, is Iwata a better option? I think that's where it comes down to, really.
Yeah.
That now again, I've seen that work well. So in one game against I think it was Kilmarnock. I'm sorry if I've got that wrong. They played together, him and McGregor, in a way which was really flexible. So it was a bit like they were a double pivot, but sometimes one would go forward and the other one would sit, and other times it would reverse. And they were really smart about how they did that. But we've also seen at home to Motherwell it not work, where they neither of them broke forward that much, and we had a real deficit of creativity. So I'm kind of conflicted as to how well that's working. My view would be that if neither Moy or Hatate is really up to full match sharpness, then I think Iwata's probably a better bet just for that reason. Because I don't like this idea of playing players that are not, like, you know, I know they're never 100%, but not fully up to kind of match speed.
Absolutely. And for that reason, you know, I love Hatate. I think Moy's been one of the shrewdest pieces of business Ange's done at Celtic. And like you said earlier on, Alan, I actually am a fan of all our midfield players, including David Turnbull, who doesn't tend to get a mention, although I'm expecting to see him on the bench tomorrow. Welcome to Mark. Great to have you on the show. You're watching on YouTube. For anyone else who's watching on the channel, give us a thumbs up. Give us a big thumbs up. Like the channel. And it's a cautionary tale from Mark. Abada should look at the likes of Armstrong and El Yunusi, both playing in the English Championship next season. Yeah, it's not always a bed of roses when you leave Celtic. Paul Morphus reckons that 10 million is fair, because Abada has yet to address deficiencies in his game that are needed to thrive in Europe. So that's an interesting take as well. Thanks for your input. And Jason Lee, guys, Kevin Nisbet is the obvious answer if Abada leaves. Now, different type of player, different position. Nisbet's a player that's been mentioned time and time again when it comes to us bringing in a striker. And we actually ran a blog yesterday, the best 11 that we've managed to poach from Hibs. I don't know if Nisbet will ever be in that 11, but it was pointed out to me this morning that Agat hadn't made it. Completely forgot about Didier Agat. He didn't make it, and he should have made it, to be fair. And Chris Killen wasn't in it, but that was deliberate. Now, with regards to Big Nisbet then, guys, what do you take of him? Because sometimes we look down our nose at players. I mean, Van Veen was mentioned the other day. I wouldn't have him in a million years. I think he's had a brilliant season. But if we want to progress, is Kevin Nisbet the standard that we're looking at? I'm going to ask you first.
No. I think he's a good player for Scotland, and I think, but is he better than O? Is he more upside than O? I don't see it, and I think if you're going to get another striker in, it has to be someone that's Kyogo's level. I think there's no point in signing someone who's just backup, because we've got backup, and I don't think that's a good way to progress as a system. So just on that, I would say no. Excellent player, really like him. Think he's a good footballer, but I just don't see it.
I see him following a similar path to the likes of Lyndon Dykes. I think he'll go down south. He'll find a club down there to do very well, and he'll probably continue to get selected by Stevie Clarke. Any of you guys disagree, Alan, Lloyd?
Nah, I completely agree with Brian on that one. Good player in the SPFL, but not for me. It doesn't suit Angie's system.
It's not going to progress us, is it? Listen, I'm going to get a prediction from you, but before I do so, there is an announcement. You might have noticed underneath this video, there's a ticket link for our next big event that hasn't been announced yet because it's all been happening in the inbox whilst we've been on the show. And I do have a graphic, but it's not 100% ready, so I'm going to show you anyway. Here we go. Let me have a look. Can I find it? Yes, there we go. This is going to be our next event. Do you fancy that, guys?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, a wee bit of the Strack. Now, there's a manager that won us 3 in a row. He also won Scottish Cups, League Cups, and got us to the last 16 twice in the Champions League. And, I think we look back on his time at the club very, very fondly. I find him a very charismatic guy, very passionate, funny individual as well. So he's going to be joining us in June, at the end of June, at Barra's Art and Design. That's a venue that Brian has already been at to see us talking to Martin O'Neill just a couple of months ago. You and Martin had a good old natter over a couple of glasses of red wine, Brian. And Gordon Strachan, for me, he is that interesting. He's up there. There's certain people I would love to interview. He's up there. So I'm really looking forward to that. You can get your tickets underneath the video. This one will definitely sell out. And what I would say, the Martin O'Neill one sold out in something like 38 hours. So be quick. It's a brilliant venue, but it only holds about 300 if you want a ticket. The link's on underneath the video. Does he get as much credit as he should, Alan, as a manager for Celtic, Gordon Strachan?
Yeah, very much, of its time. But I think, given the nature of the job that he had, he was up against a strong EBT fueled Rangers, and he had to massively down. He was taking over a squad that I would argue hadn't really been managed well. There hadn't been that succession planning in place. It was a squad that was strong, obviously, from 1 to 11, but was getting older, and there wasn't a lot of depth to it. And he did a great job in massively reducing the wage bill whilst continuing, success on the pitch. People maybe didn't like his sometimes pragmatic football. My biggest criticism would be he had arguably one of the best number 10s in the world in Nakamura, and stuck him out on the wing. But that's another story. But yeah, listen, I think he all in, he did a fantastic job, and for reasons that I completely understand, more to do with emotion than common sense, he stayed longer than the 3 years that he said made sense for him to be a Celtic manager, and that was unfortunate. But we all know why that was. But yeah, should be remembered with great fondness for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
The man got us to the last 16 in Champions League twice with Gary Caldwell and Steve McManus at centre half. He's a managerial genius. He's one of the most underrated Celtic managers in history, in my opinion.
What about that through ball by Caldwell to Nakamura for the goal against Rangers? I mean, I'm not sure if he meant it, but
the one against AC
what
Milan
a through ball that was. Yeah,
that's why you needed Nakamura as a 10.
No, exactly. That's the area of the park, Alan, that you wanted to see him operating at, and it didn't happen often enough. Yeah, Gordon Strachan, I think he's brilliant. He's a great guest, and I'm really looking forward to it. And over this weekend, with everything that's happening, I'm sure the tickets will go quickly. So get in if you want to get involved. And obviously, at the end of this month, we've still got a few tickets left for Jackie Mack, and that's at Gracie's. 2 brilliant venues, and you can meet some of the Acsom crew as well. Listen, it's been tremendous today, 850 strong in the live stream. It's great to see Alan for his once-a-month appearance on Acsom. Acsom. Lloyd and Brian can usually be seen on a Friday. So thank you all for your contribution, guys. And thank you, every single one of you, for getting involved with a Celtic State of Mind. We'll see you tomorrow, half an hour before kick-off. And hopefully we'll see you all getting the jersey off and running about celebrating a few goals. Catch you then.